Hi everyone. Thanks for coming to this session on Friday morning. I hope the hangover is not too bad for everyone. My name is Yoann Gini. I'm running a consultancy business in France, delivering service all around the world, and mainly doing system and network administration, mainly targeted for SMB and education, and also doing software development, and you may have already used one of my tools. The main one is LDAP, a self-service menu to help your IT department to reduce the need for help desk. The session for today will be about going full cloud with Azure AD or Google Cloud Identity, and in a specific point of view of managing your Apple fleet. So how you will integrate your MDM with one of those two solutions. The main idea behind going full cloud for most people is being able to have setup and physical growth with the organization, allowing everyone to work from anywhere with the smallest investment possible at the beginning, and with the same user experience regardless of the location. This is what most people are expecting from a full cloud solution. And if you do it well, you should be able to reach that goal. The thing with going full cloud and removing any kind of on-premise solution like Active Directory is you have to find a way to manage your identity correctly. So the starting idea is to have a directory as a service somewhere and to have all cloud-based solutions that you will need to work, being able to rely on this directory as a service. So if you use G Suite or Office 365 for mail, for text editor and things like that, if you use Exchange or Gmail for mail, or if you use Zoom or RingCentral for video conferencing and things like that, you will have a way with all those tools to integrate with a directory as a service using SAML and SCIM. And if you don't know those two protocols, I gave a conference this year on the first day about identity federation and identity management, and that was specifically dedicated to that part, to go more in detail about those new modern authentication and provisioning protocol. The thing is, all those cloud solutions are able to rely on SAML and on SCIM because they are web-based. Your main issue when you will play with full cloud setup is, what about your MDM? Which kind of protocol are you able to use to bound your MDM to your directory as a service? You may want to go with SAML. SAML, if we take a snippet of what SAML is, it's a modern authentication protocol where basically when your user use a device to reach an online service, an access request is done at some point, but the system, the remote server, the service provider will return a redirect request telling the endpoints to redirect the user to the identity provider to do an authentication request at the identity provider, and once we are authenticated at the identity provider, we then are redirected. We have a specific payload, a token, to send back to the online service, to the service provider. And this is what SAML is doing. Again, I spent a whole hour on this specific on the first day, so feel free to watch it online. All of this is over HTTPS. The thing is, for our MDM, we will have at some point to authenticate the user on the directory. And there is one specific thing to think about with MDM connected to a directory as a service for user authentication at this time. It's the current state of the device enrollment protocol. When you are on this login window at this time of the year, during the setup assistant part, when you are requested to log in at on your MDM, you are requested for username and a password. You don't have any kind of web interface here at this time. So if we take a small look about what happened here, we have our setup assistant ready to asking for authentication. Our user will authenticate, specifying username and password. And this username and password will be sent to the MDM over the MDM protocol itself to do an authentication. And at this time, it's only basic or digest authentication over HTTP. Yes. And then the MDM will have to send this back to the directory service, both username and password, to authenticate the user. So that means SAML in this specific scenario at this current time of the year is absolutely not usable at all, because SAML requires web-based interface to redirect the user to the identity provider login page. And here, Setup Assistant on both iOS and macOS are requesting username and password to send it to the MDM. So this is not compatible at this time. That means for today, you will need to use LDAP. LDAP, as a reminder, is Lightware Directory Access Protocol. And the important part is access protocol. It's not a database. It's a querying language, actually. It's not a database. It's something to keep in mind. That means when we are considering a directory service, you may have some modern service that will rely on SAML and ICIM to work with your directory service, but you may also have some old service that will rely on LDAP or your MDM fleet, your MDM managed fleet that will also need LDAP somewhere. That means for modern solution where you are going full cloud, at one point you will have something called a LDAP gateway. And that's actually the original design of LDAP at the beginning. You are all used to have OpenLDAP or Active Directory to provide both database and LDAP gateway in one solution. But when we look at why LDAP has been made, it comes from the telco time, and it's clearly at the beginning a gateway to an existing directory service. It's not both solution in one, the directory service and the querying language. So we are going here back to the original design of LDAP, having an LDAP gateway somewhere to be able to request an existing directory that may or may not be in the same solution. So if we are going full cloud and we have those directory services that must provide some LDAP gateway, the question is which provider you want to use. And here, clearly, not all providers are born the same, are born equal. So as my recommendation on the market, I would say consider only Google Cloud Identity or Azure AD. Those two are not perfect, but they are far to be the most reliable on the market. And personally, when we do consulting services with my company, we don't accept to be accountable for any kind of other directory as a service on the market because of their LDAP implementation. So far, those are the only two I've seen that work for real. The Google one, called Google Cloud Identity, is relying on an LDAP scheme that looks like the POSIX one, when in the meantime, the Azure Active Directory one is an Active Directory lookalike. They are not exactly POSIX and Active Directory. There is a difference. You may not be able to do everything you are already doing with those kind of LDAP schema, but somehow it's really close. And to put some perspective to those services, both are used by the main solution you use. So basically, when you have Google Suite, G Suite, you have in the back Google Cloud Identity available. You may need some license upgrade to get access to the LDAP gateway, but it's already ready. And when you are using Office 365, Azure AD is already used. You have access to it. And you may eventually have to pay a small fee to get access to the LDAP gateway. But the directory service in both cases are already existing when you are using both G Suite or Office 365. So, in both cases, the setup architecture will be the same. We have the directory service provided by Azure AD or Google Cloud Identity. We will have a LDAP gateway somewhere. And we have a MDM. The thing is, if you are going full cloud, both of directory service and the LDAP gateway on the side and MDM on the other side are on two different cloud hosting providers. You won't find, except if you are using Intune or the Google MDM, it won't be on the same solution. And I don't think you want to use those two most of the time. So if you are going to any kind of other MDM for your solution, you will have to find a way to provide the link between your MDM and the LDAP gateway. And for that, most of the time, you will use MDM Relay, like Workspace ONE Include Connector or Jamf Infrastructure Manager. Something that will be able to provide you, your MDM, a way to reach your LDAP gateway without exposing your LDAP gateway over the internet. So what we will do now is to look at the setup for both solutions. And we will start with Azure AD. So we have to create the LDAP gateway, the MDM relay, and set everything up. So the first thing to do is to create the LDAP gateway on Azure. And on Microsoft Azure, when you're having Azure Active Directory or Office 365, the LDAP gateway service is called Azure AD Domain Service. So that's a bit misleading. The LDAP gateway name is actually Azure Active Directory Domain Service. To set this up, you simply go to the Azure AD portal and you start to create your new Azure AD Domain Service. You will have to provide a DNS name, so a domain name for your Azure AD somehow, and select some resources for invoicing purpose. So basically, it's a bunch of resource group where you can set, okay, this will be hosted in France, and this will be this kind of accounting and payment account, and etc. You will need a virtual network to provide on a private space the access to the LDAP gateway. So you can create a new one if you don't have any. This domain service has some specific admin right needed. So you will set up the list of admin member you need to act with the domain service for Azure AD. And once it's done, you will also have to say which identity I want to be synced with my LDAP gateway, which identity will be able to be reachable from the LDAP gateway. So you can say all, and then you are done. The setup will take like an hour or so. Yeah, Microsoft. Basically, what they are doing in the end is they are spawning two domain controllers for you and connecting the Azure AD with sync solution to those specific domain controller. That's more or less what is actually happening on the back in the end. It's actually the exact opposite of when you are having on-prem ID and want to sync your identity with Azure AD. It's actually you having Azure AD and you want to sync your identity with your domain service on Azure that will act as the LDAP gateway. So an hour later, you end up on this resume page. And there is two last things to do. The first one is to update your private virtual network on Azure to use those two new domain controllers as DNS, like you will do on any kind of local Active Directory setup. So you update your virtual network on Azure to configure all your hosted VM to use those two new domain controllers as DNS resolver. And the other one is about the password hash. Basically, it will need NTLM hash to be synced from Azure AD to Azure AD domain service. By default, if you are full cloud only, the Azure AD identity does not have the fingerprint needed for the password. So that means if you are in a full cloud setup only, you will have to ask your pre-existing users to renew their password. It can be the same again, but they will have to do it again to issue the new password representation needed for the Azure AD domain service. So if you are doing a setup from scratch, enable this part as soon as possible before you are creating your user and the user start to use the service. If you already have Azure AD full cloud and you are deploying that part, be aware that you will need to have a password cycle done before being able to use user identity with the LDAP gateway. The next part now is to create a new VM for the MDM Relay agent. And the same, you will do it in Azure. And in the virtual machine part, you will create a new VM. And to create this new VM, you will have to, again, specify a resource group for invoicing purpose. You will name it in something that you can understand in the future. You will select the compatible OS version and set up your initial admin account for this VM. Then you will have to set up the disk. So by default, it's performance SSD, the most expensive one. You may want to lower it a little bit with standard SSD or even HDD. MDM Relay agent does not have to have a lot of performance most of the time. Then you will set up your networking option. And one of the options is, do you want your VM to be reachable over the internet with a public IP? Do you want to add a public IP or not on a NAT for this VM? Usually I don't, but I will talk about this in the slide after. And that's all. Basically, we did all the settings to create a new VM for our MDM Relay agent purpose. And when it's done, you will get a notification by mail telling you, hey, your VM is ready. You are now able to reach the VM. And that's actually one of the questions. How do I access this VM on Azure? There is two solutions, a good and a less good. You are able to access all private virtual network on Azure over VPN, like OpenVPN or IPsec or whatever. That's the good one because it's protected. Your administrative services for your VM are not reachable over the internet. It's private, it's secure, etc. But you will be billed for that. It's Microsoft, so there is money in the end. The other solution is to have your RDP over internet, but you may not want to do that actually. And if you are enabling the public IP for the VM, the thing I just disabled during the demo, you are actually having your RDP over internet. So not really a good idea. Once you reach your VM console, it's a Windows server like you already seen so far. So you just have to install your MDM Relay agent. So Workspace ONE Cloud Connector, Jam Infrastructure Manager, or whatever. Once you have your agent installed, you need a bind user for your MDM to be able to read your directory service. And you will simply manage that in the Azure AD part, not Azure AD domain service. Identity are managed in the Azure AD part, and you will simply create a new user for your MDM, like any kind of other. And actually, when you are creating users, even your end user, it is a process. So basically, you go to Azure AD, users, you create a new user, and you will have to set the full name, the display name of the user. You will have to set the username as a user principal name, so in the form of an email address, and I recommend you to actually use the real email address of the user to keep things simple. You have the profile with first name, last name, job title, and department, and eventually some groups. And you will get a generated password that you have to keep and send to the user. And that's how you create an Azure identity. If you are using Office 365, you just create the identity like you are used to. In the Office 365 portal, you will do exactly the same, and it will work the same. The identity in the end are created here. You do it in Azure portal only if you are just having Azure AD. Like for example, this was set up. I did it with a free Azure AD setup, and so I didn't have access to Office 365 for this one. So now that you have your identity, the thing to remember is Azure Active Directory is not the same as Azure AD domain service. Azure Active Directory is the identity provider when Azure AD domain service is your LDAP gateway. And so when you will try to link your service provider to your identities, you will work with the Azure AD domain service. And when you are accessing the LDAP gateway, here is what a user looks like. There's a lot of information, really close to what Active Directory is, but with some really specific additional information made for Azure. If we clean this a little bit and look at what is useful for us, we get the display name as CN, we get the last name as SN, the first name as given name, and all information like the user principal name and etc. It's Azure AD only on my setup, so I don't have a mail field. But if you are using Office 365 where the exchange schema is added, you will also have a field for the mail address split separately from the user principal name. So depending on your setup, you may have some more additional fields. And some other thing interesting, you get the preferred language of the user. So that's actually something nice that you don't always get. You are actually able, from the directory service, to know which language is the preferred one for your user. So you can do some more advanced setup like that. So this is what the LDAP is looking like, is looking for. So when you are going to your MDM, you will need to specify all those information. So here is the example with Workspace ONE as an MDM. And we will set this up. And basically, we are going to the all settings panes where we set up the global infrastructure for Workspace ONE, enterprise integration, directory service. And from here, we will just follow the wizard to make it work. Since Azure AD look a lot like AD, it's actually simple to configure. So you will be asked for a question like, do you use SAML for authentication? No, because we use Apple devices. What is your domain? So that's the name we specified when we have created the Azure AD domain service. What's the username we use for as a service account and the password? And what kind of information I can provide generally about the LDAP, like do I want a specific search base or whatever? I can test that everything is working at this tape. Test is successful, that's great. And this is specific to Workspace ONE, like do you want LDAP change to be applied automatically? Do you want group to be merged automatically? Disabled status to be used automatically or not? And do you want to be to allow authentication from the directory service. And that's it. Basically, your your LDAP gateway is now set up in Workspace ONE as a MDM. I'm not sure if I did something else in the demo. No. So the Workspace ONE as an MDM is now set to use the MDM Relay agent Workspace ONE Cloud Connector hosted on a VM in Azure in the same network scope as the Azure AD domain service, where we have 2 IP addresses for 2 domain controllers. And here, Workspace ONE is using usual Active Directory discovering service over DNS to find the IP address of the 2 domain controllers for this domain service. When you are using Workspace ONE, all users are not imported by default. Workspace ONE do something smart, I would say. In the user base of Workspace ONE, you actually get the users that are actually used for enrollment on the device, or the one you manually imported for testing purpose. So if we do that, like we try the Azure AD identity import, we go in the user part, we add the user, and we ask for a lookup in the directory. We specify the name of the user. So here it's a SAM account name, so the part before the @ on the user principal name. And we see that everything is filled correctly. So yeah, my LDAP integration is working well. I did manual import here to be sure that the LDAP integration is working as expected. And now I just don't have to care about this. If a new user gets onboarded, during the first authentication on the MDM, the username will be requested on the directory service and the user profile will be imported. If now I'm looking at the macOS user experience, I will simply set up my new Mac as you will do for any other directory. And when you are on the authentication part of the EP, you simply enter your SAM account name, so the short name. It's the part before the @ on the user principal name, and the password. And that's the usual user experience expected at this time. And once enrolled, you get your Mac visible in the MDM inventory, correctly linked to the user we just used for the enrollment, as expected. So that's the Azure AD part. Is there any question before we go to the same workflow for Google? Yeah, wait a minute.
Okay, so you did the AD bind, but if I recall correctly, there's an Azure bind section also in directory services in Workspace ONE.
So that part is, so yeah, when we go in Workspace ONE in the directory service settings, below the directory service information, there is a specific settings in AirWatch, Workspace ONE, about binding a Workspace ONE to Azure AD itself. This part is used when you are being able to use SAML authentication for device enrollment. So at this time of the year, it's only when you are using Windows with Autopilot or with self-service enrollment. That's why you need this feature, is to be able to use Azure AD as an authentication service for Workspace ONE in terms of enrollment or when you have a web page for enrollment, and when you are using the self-service portal directly on the web. That's the 2 cases at this time when you will use this Azure AD integration as native one, so self-service portal and Windows enrollment, and maybe Apple devices in the future. Other questions so far? So, the same with Google. Google Cloud Identity, everything is managed from the Google Admin Console. It's just a new service. So enabling the Google Identity LDAP gateway. you simply go on the admin portal in apps, in LDAP, and from here, you create a new LDAP client. So let's call this LDAP gateway or MDM gateway or whatever. You specify which part of your domain on Google gets available over LDAP, if the service is able to read information or just authenticate, and if group information will be available too. Once it's created, you will get an authentication certificate. And that's a tricky part with Google Cloud Identity as it part. You have to authenticate your client with client-side certificate. So you download the certificate. And once it's done, you may also need some access credential because you may want your MDM to be able to be authenticated with a bind account. So it will be generated here. Take care, the password you are seeing there is never able to be get back. So you must write it somewhere, document it if you want, otherwise you will have to cycle it. And then once it's done, you just have to enable your LDAP gateway. So you turn on the service and it's now available. This LDAP app things is available as soon as you have the Google Cloud Identity license built in your Google Suite or simply as its own. So this is the thing. Certificate-based authentication is mandatory with Google Suite, with Google Cloud Identity. And so far, I don't know any MDM who has native support for the certificate-based authentication over LDAP. The thing with Google Cloud Identity is there is only one shared LDAP gateway for everyone, ldap.google.com, available over the internet. They consider it safe since it relies on certificate authentication. So if you have an MDM that natively supports integration with Google Cloud Identity, you can simply provide the authentication, the certificate authentication in your MDM and just go straight to your Google Cloud Identity LDAP gateway. If you don't have such an MDM, you will have to do an MDM relay. And so here is to create, we create a new VM in Google Cloud. So we are in the Google Cloud Platform part. And we will simply go to the computing engine to create a new VM. And it's mainly the same as we did with Azure. We create a new VM for the Cloud Connector or the Infrastructure Manager that we will have to set up a region and some OS. So you have some more detail here about machine type and everything, so the performance you need, not eventually available on the other side. It's maybe more complex to pick. And the same, you set up your, you set it up as Windows 1. Yeah, that's the same. Accessing the VM over Google Cloud Identity, Google Cloud Platform is the same. You do VPN over Google Cloud and you pay for it, or you open RDP over Internet. Yeah. Here we will use this VM for specific things. As I told you, you need to authenticate over the LDAP gateway of Google with a certificate on the client side. Since most of the MDM on the market does not support it yet, you need to use sconnect. S-tunnel, actually. Oh. I may have an issue on the name, but whatever. Yeah. So basically, this part is a middleware that you will have on any kind of TLS connection, where you set up the upstream server. Here, it will act as a client on this upstream server and redistribute it on any local address over port 389. The upstream server will be ldap.google.com on port 636, so that's the TLS version of it. And the authentication certificate will be those two keys we downloaded during the initial creation time on Google. The thing is, it must be renewed in 3 years. So you will have maintenance task on that part to avoid your certificate to be expired and your LDAP connection to don't work. Yeah, so the real name is stunnel, not sconnect. Sconnect is something else, sorry. stunnel, and this is the installation part. We basically install sconnect on the Relay VM, where we will also install Cloud Connector or Infrastructure Manager. So this is a really simple tool to install. It's quite straightforward and quick to install. When you install it, you will be requested to create an identity certificate for this stunnel server. It's when you want to redistribute your service also over TLS, but without certificate-based authentication. So let's configure something as you want, but it won't be used for or specific case of the MDM, because the MDM part will stay on the local host, so you may not really need encryption on that. You don't really need to start it after the installation, because first you need to configure it. And to configure this, you go into C, program file, x86, stunnel, config. And here there is the stunnel.conf file that you will copy on your desktop. And you can just edit it with Notepad. And from here, you simply have to remove the demonstration configuration available on the bottom. So you just remove the whole exam part, and you replace this by the payload I've shown you. It's also in the LDAP, in the Google Cloud Identity documentation. So you just configure the bridge, and you replace your configuration in the config folder. Once it's done, you add your Google Cloud certificate, the private key and the certificate, to the same folder as the configuration file. And once it's done, your stunnel service is ready to be used, basically. So you just have to start it, and eventually to start it as a Windows service. So if for some reason your VM restarts, it will start automatically. To do that, you simply go in the Windows menu in stunnel, and here you have a shortcut to do the service install. And it will add stunnel as a service on Windows. And once it's done, you just simply go to the service manager on Windows to turn the service on. By default, it's set to run automatically at boot start, but if you don't restart here, you need to start it manually. And here, you are ready to go. You did the middleware authentication with stunnel to the LDAP gateway. So your infrastructure manager or Cloud Connect also being installed on will also be installed on this virtual machine to have both on the same to keep things simple. And when it's done, here is the LDAP scheme available on Google, and that's actually all we have. It's not filtered. So it's way more smaller than what we have on Azure AD. And one of the things is there is no UUID, Universal Unique Identifier. That may be an issue depending on what you intend to do. The thing is a bit special with Google. But you always get what you need, basically, so first name, last name, full name, short name, and email address. And groups membership, of course. So if we go in our MDM to integrate this LDAP server to Workspace ONE here again, we will go to the directory service integration part as usual, but we will go to a manual configuration here because it's not the Active Directory scheme. So we will set up everything manually as random LDAP server. And since the stunnel and the Cloud Connector is on the same Windows server, you can actually use the loopback as a LDAP gateway because, yeah, the LDAP gateway will be available from the loopback on your Relay agent. So you set the loopback, you set the bind account, so the one that was been generated during the LDAP gateway configuration on Google Cloud Identity part. And once it's done, you actually have to set up the LDAP scheme. So we will go in the user part of the directory service settings to actually configure the domain base reshares, base DN for the LDAP search. So it will be basically your DC equal your domain virgule DC equal UTLD. It's automatically generated like that. Object identifier, since you don't have one, you can rely on entry UUID, which is a standard for all LDAP gateway, but a limited one. And then username will be UID, you change your display name, and etc. And one other thing with specific, object class is something specific to Windows schema, and here it will be the object category is specific to Active Directory, and object class is specific to general LDAP, so you have to change it. So there is few tweaks to do, regardless of the MDM, because most MDM are set by design to go with the Azure the Active Directory scheme, not the usual POSIX scheme. So the same for group. You have to update all your mapping attribute for the LDAP to be able to use it, and the same using entry UUID as a fallback for the UUID. And CNAME for the name and display name for the command name. So that's more complex on the overall. You have these external things, you have custom mapping to do, but in the end, it will work the same. And we can now create some user. So it will be simply in the usual user management portal. It's the same base. So you will be able from here to create a new user with first name, last name, email address, and etc. So you may eventually want to do a static password here to forward it to the user, ask the user to change it on the first connection, depending on your policy. But there is one thing that is problematic, and I will show it after. You can also directly add it to a group. You will have group management included, so you can do whatever you want from the MDM side based on groups, so that's a good thing. The issue with Google, and it's a really specific one, term and condition. That's the most stupid thing they ever did. As an organization, my employees does not have to accept term and condition, but they don't recognize that part. So if you are managing your Google Cloud identity using Google Admin Console, your identity are not usable over the LDAP gateway before the user actually accepts the term and condition. The password will not work. So you will have to provide somehow a way for the user to first connect to this account using a web browser, to accept the term and condition. The only way for you to avoid this screen is simply to don't use the Google Admin Console. If you use a third-party tools using the API to manage users, you actually have an option in the API, term and condition already accepted, that you don't have in the Google Admin Portal. Thank you, Google. Once it's done, we can do the test import as we did before. So simply go to the user part, add a user, select the directory as a source of information, and use a short name. Everything's look great. We can use it so far. We have all information needed, so we can save. And we can go to macOS enrollment, and it will work just as expected. You will use the short name of the user to pass the DEP authentication screen and the password, and it works just as you would accept from any directory service integration for your MDM. Once it's enrolled, you correctly get your device in the MDM inventory as you would expect. Link to the user identity would just enroll with it. So that's how you set up any kind of MDM. I did the demonstration with Workspace ONE, but any MDM that supports LDAP will be able to do. You will be able to do exactly the same. If for some reason you have an MDM that does not have an MDM Relay agent like Jamf Infrastructure Manager or Workspace ONE Cloud Connect, you will, in both cases, be able to expose your LDAP gateway over the public internet. You have this option in Azure AD. When you go in the Azure AD domain service, in the property part, you have an option to tick and to say, okay, my LDAP go public. You have to specify a certificate for TLS encryption. It will be LDAP-S as a mandatory option. And you will be able eventually to limit the scope of clients with the firewalling part of Azure. And for Google, it's already over the internet, but you need this S-tunnel thing. And S-tunnel, you will simply expose the open port eventually over TLS, over the internet, and the same manage restriction for this port with your firewall. So both scenarios will be doable with an MDM that does not have this relay agent solution, but it's a little bit more complex, and you have more things to take care of for security purpose. If I have to compare the two, Google Cloud Identity is interesting because if your MDM is supporting certificate-based authentication, you can actually go cloud to cloud without any kind of setup. You just create the LDAP gateway account in the Google Admin portal, you set it up in your MDM, and cloud talk one-to-one directly without any kind of VM in the middle, etc. etc. But so far, I didn't find any MDM who have it. So if you know one who have it, just let me know. I would be interested. LDAP over Internet is supported with Azure AD, but you have to provide a certificate for TLS protection. And for some reason, Microsoft didn't think about integrating the certificate management for you. So they are able to bill you for anything except configuring automatically the certificate used for your LDAP gateway. So this is something that you will have to handle manually and to renew every 3 years when your certificate expires. On the downside, by default on Google Cloud Identity, if you are using this VM agent in the middle, you have to renew the certificate in any way. Sorry, I started over. On Google Cloud Identity, since you are using certificate-based authentication, you have maintenance to do every 3 years to renew the certificate, regardless of your connection method from your MDM to your Google Cloud Identity LDAP gateway. It can be over a VM relay agent or directly. You will have every 3 years to think about, hey, I need to renew my authentication certificate. And on the downside is, if you are just relying on Google Cloud and not a third-party solution to create the identity, user must connect from web first. So that means user connecting from a personal device or a shared device in your company to pass this term and condition screen. The downside on Azure AD for me is it's not always the case like you are starting from scratch. You may have some existing user, and so you will have to do a password cycle for the existing user to make them available over the LDAP gateway. So on the overall, I would say Google Cloud Identity is quite complex and Azure AD quite straightforward. So my global opinion would be, if you have choice, maybe it's more simple to go Azure. And with all those upcoming features with Apple Business Manager and Managed Apple ID, you may actually want to have Azure because it's actually the only one supported at this time. So yeah, if I have to name one, I will name Azure AD so far. But if you are using Google Cloud Identity, you can do it as well. There is no issue on that. One question I always have about this topic is, hey, can I bind my classroom to this LDAP thing? So binding your Mac to use network account for school purpose most of the time to Google Cloud Identity or Azure AD, Google Cloud Identity, you should be able to do it with a custom LDAP map, like any custom LDAP server. But the thing is, your user will be able to connect, but since Google Cloud does not have any kind of UUID available on the LDAP scheme, you will not be able to use the network user extension on the MDM part. Like if you are using an on-prem AD, when a user connects to a Mac, the user identity is actually reported to the MDM, so the MDM can have user-level management of those network users. This is something that works well, but that rely on UUID. And since you don't have UUID with Google, you will not be able to use that part. So yes, you can certainly connect your Google identity you bind your Mac to your Google LDAP service, but you won't be able to manage at the user level of the session. You will be able to manage with MDM only at the computer level, and that may be a bit limiting. For Azure AD, so it's AD, but as you know, the native macOS integration on Active Directory is a bit limited. That's a nice way of saying it. So far, what I've tested, the native plugin does not support the Azure AD domain service. But for what I've seen so far, Centrify is actually able to do it. So with both Centrify or a custom LDAP map, you should be able to link to bind your Mac for classroom things to your Azure AD. And in both cases, you will have some VPN to put somewhere to go LAN to LAN to reach the LDAP gateway. So that maybe having a local LDAP gateway with S-Tunnel for Google, and that may be using a VPN LAN to LAN to reach the virtual network over Azure for Azure AD part. And that's the actual state of the thing. As you know, or as you may know, during the WWDC, Apple announced that DEP will evolve in the future to support modern authentication, finally. So let's take a look at the same process in few months, let's say. The time for all MDM to be updated, to correctly support this modern authentication for DEP, and etc. So far, there is one on the market who is already ready. It's Mozile. Yeah. So if we go to the organization part of in the Mozile admin console, you have on the left part a direct feature for Microsoft Azure AD. So you select, OK, add a new Azure AD profile, you start, you get redirected to your Microsoft login, you select your Azure AD admin, you accept the fact that Mozile will be able to get access to user info, you wait a little bit, and all fun information about the user are visible now. You can review that it worked correctly, and you can start the integration. And that's done. You did your directory bound from Mozile MDM to Azure AD, and you get mail telling you, hey, it's ready. OK, my users are here, indeed, and I can be ready for enrollment, but not with the actual state of the system. If you do that thing right now, it's a non-native user experience. And I would say it's a bit hacky. It plays a lot with the login window, with post-enrollment authentication on agent and everything. So that's something I don't like for my setup so far. I try to stay as close as possible to the native user experience on all Apple devices. But that's for now. When Catalina is out and iOS 13 is out, it will be way more nice because you will have actually this setup, this screen during Setup Assistant. The DEP part will be your actual Azure AD login portal. Way more nice. And eventually, if you are using Google Cloud somehow, you will have a web page to accept the term and condition from Google. I don't know if you've seen during the video, but there is upcoming feature for Google Cloud Entity integration as well. It's not ready so far, but they will do it in the future. So That's it. As I've told you, I did a whole talk about identity management alone on Wednesday, so maybe you can watch it. You will have some additional information about identity management and SAML and everything. So if you are really interested by those modern authentication and user provisioning mechanism, I recommend you to watch it. And thank you. So if you have any question, please let me know. No question? Yeah.
Do you know how, like roughly how expensive the Azure AD domain services would be per month to add? I know what the VM would be, but I don't know
in
what
euro on standard price, so that's not the education one if you are in edu, it's 90 euro, 90. And that's about the same thing of all other solutions so far. Yeah, and it's not per user; it's a flat price. Right. Per month. Yeah. Too great.
The lack of UUID on Google's cloud directory. Has anybody talked to them about it? Is that something that they might add in the future? Because it seems like a simple add, and it would make a lot of things suddenly possible, right?
I didn't find someone to talk with it. Like, I've tried. I had some exchange with Google guys, and yeah, we don't have it. Yeah. So I did feature requests and everything, but so far I didn't get any feedback. But yeah, it's easy to add. So maybe if multiple people ask for it, not just me, we may get it actually. Yeah. Other question? Okay. Thank you.